97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with 97.3 ESPN.com's Andrew DiCecco.
My first allegiance is what will be best for the Philadelphia Eagles and our fans for the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
All right, Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by Dr. Lyle M. Back. For everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery, go to ilovelylback.com or call 856-MAKEOVER for Dr. Lyle M. Back, proud sponsor of Football at 4. Andrew DiCecco, 97.3 ESPN.com, Inside the Birds, and of course, here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, the Eagles have a head coach. It is Nick Sirianni. He is the former offensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts. Did not call plays, so we'll find out more. I know it's a guy that some people have mixed reviews on. Some people like it, some people don't. You typically don't get a consensus. That's the world we live in today. Andrew DiCecco, though, you liked him going back a year or so ago. You were kind of intrigued by Nick Sirianni, and he is now the head coach.
Yeah, and, I think anyone who feels strongly one way or the other, it's a little bit too premature to make that determination without entirely knowing who his coaching staff is going to be comprised of. But, I mean, here's what we know. The guy has worked his way up. He's known for optimizing his talent and player development. What do I mean by that? Well, look no further than Mo Alley Cox, who's an undrafted tight end who became an integral part of what they do on offense. Look at running back Nyheim Hines, a fourth-round pick who became one of the primary pass-catching running backs in football. Zach Pascal, Marcus Johnson, DeMichael Harris was an undrafted wide receiver. They all stepped up and were ready to go when the receiving corps was decimated by injuries. He had different levels of success with Andrew Luck, Jacoby Brissett, and Phillip Rivers. He's known to be a motivator and a bright young offensive mind. And he does have a bit of an edge to him. So for those thinking that he can be something that he's not going to coach his players hard, well, I mean, I've heard differently, and we'll see what happens here in Philadelphia. But there's definitely plenty to be intrigued about if you're an Eagles fan.
He didn't call plays, so people will wonder: is he going to come in here and call plays, or do you anticipate he brings a veteran offensive coordinator along with him?
The sense that I get, I feel like he's going to bring a veteran offensive coordinator with him. Of course, this is his opportunity to run the show, so it wouldn't surprise me if he decides, hey, you know what? I'm going to take the reins here and call the shots. But a name that makes a lot of sense that I saw someone write on Twitter would be Anthony Lynn, who he has coaching experience with when he was with the Chargers. Anthony Lynn, of course, was a running backs coach, became a head coach. He worked his way up. He was an offensive coordinator with the Buffalo Bills in 2016. Surrounding Nick Sirianni with a veteran coaching staff, to me, makes the most sense to set himself up for success. So that would be a name that would make sense. Of course, Marcus Brady, the quarterbacks coach from the Colts, he's getting some looks elsewhere, but I think that the familiarity with Nick would make sense here in Philadelphia. So there's a couple of names to keep an eye on.
How much of this is a statement to Carson Wentz? We got you a guy that worked with Frank Reich. Let's fix this.
Yeah, Hunter, as soon as I heard the news, the first thing I thought of was, wow, this was a move that was made solely with Carson Wentz in mind, knowing that he's a guy that's worked with 3 different quarterbacks. He's someone who has a history. He got phenomenal seasons out of Phillip Rivers and Andrew Luck. Like, he didn't just work with them. He found ways to tap into their best skill sets and get them to play at a high level. And it wasn't just one player. So he's definitely well versed in that. He's a younger guy, so he has there's a relatable aspect to him as a head coach. And I really think he had a good understanding of what Howie and Jeff were looking for and what their objectives were going into this season. And, first and foremost, it was reviving Carson Wentz. And I think that they felt that he was ultimately the best man for the job. And now it's kind of curious to wonder what becomes of Jalen Hurts, because I do think with this move, it's very clear that Carson Wentz is going to be their guy moving forward.
Yeah, and I know that Frank Reich, obviously his head coach, and I'm wondering if there was any endorsement from him. They went down the Andy road to get Doug Peterson. Did this time they call Frank and say, hey, Frank, what can you tell us about this guy? And they felt comfortable knowing, because let's be honest, you might have been on his radar. He might have been on your radar a year ago, but this guy wasn't being interviewed by anybody else as far as we know, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think he had to do with obviously the no play calling and the youth, and you need a coach's endorsement in order to kind of earn consideration. And obviously their ties with Frank Reich certainly played into that. And I also can't help but wonder if Frank Reich was telling Sirianni how to best handle Carson Wentz, what's the best course of action in coaching him, and things of that nature, so that when he went into the interview process, he was telling them exactly what they wanted to hear, and he had an inside scope of how to best get him back on the right track to get him playing to the caliber that we saw in 2017. So, yeah, I definitely think that the tie with Frank Reich helped in this situation.
Does your gut tell you they dodged a bullet going down the Josh McDaniels road?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Josh McDaniels would have been a flashier head coaching signing, but that could have went either way. It wouldn't have surprised me if it got derailed by week 10, and it wouldn't surprise me if you saw a lot of structure and a more disciplined football team. But he's a guy that likes to clash with. He has a history of clashing with the people that he works with, and he wants some sort of control, and that doesn't always bode well with a lot of guys. And I always wonder with his emotional intelligence, and kind of got the Chip Kelly vibes with that. And I feel like when the way that Nick Sirianni is perceived and the way that he seems to come off in the limited exposure that I've seen, he seems to be a guy that kind of falls in line with what the Eagles really need in that locker room right now. And now the question becomes, is he going to be a guy that's going to coach his coaches hard? And is he a guy that knows how to harp on guys when they're starting to fall behind and hold them accountable? Because that's really what was lacking on this team under the Doug Peterson regime. So a lot of things need to change here, and obviously the change is coming.
Yep, and Nick Sirianni is your new head coach, and he'll obviously now have to set his coordinators, and you're wondering, as we just kind of talked about, will he call his own plays? Will he bring in a veteran guy? Who are some guys that you think, just off the top of your head, that he's worked with or that he may be, thinking about?
The defensive backs coach, his name's escaping me, Jonathan
Gannon.
Jonathan Gannon, right? He's getting a look, I believe, with the Chargers. But when you look at, he's a young coordinator. I feel like if you get a veteran offensive coordinator like an Anthony Lynn, let's say, then you have a young up and coming defensive coordinator who's worked with Nick. But you really look at the work that he did with that young secondary, and Rock Ya-Sin, the corner, and Julian Blackmon, who everyone likes to talk about. Antoine Winfield, the rookie safety, of course, for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who we're going to see this weekend. But Julian Blackmon has played as well as any young safety in football this year. And I think that, and it's not just him. You look all around that secondary. They were pretty much the unit that kept that Colts defense together and have been playing at such a high level. And I think he was a young name that's kind of a coach that's on the rise. And I feel like if you're Nick, you want to get a nice blend of youth, but also experience there to support him.
That's interesting, too, on the defensive side of the ball. This is where, I guess, you mentioned Gannon, who would be a younger guy, and I guess some people would wonder, what about a veteran guy? What about bringing in someone like a Jim Schwartz, who basically is just the coach of the defense, and you don't get in his way too much, a veteran.
Or Marvin Lewis. Marvin Lewis is another good name.
There you go. Or we've the Wade Phillips name seems to be coming up a lot. He's a guy who I think worked with Nick in San Diego.
Yeah, and I feel like I think it was a couple weeks ago he put a tweet out there that said, "I'm ready to get back out there, ready to retire from retirement," I believe was the tweet. So he would be another name. And like I said, I feel like he needs to get that stability of coaches around him to make sure that he's setting himself up for success.
Real quick, by the way, Sirianni was requested to interview for the Browns job when Dorsey was the GM in Cleveland, and apparently he declined that interview last year because he wanted to focus on the playoff run. So he had been at least on somebody's somebody's head coaching target, and it turns out that it's John Dorsey, who happens to be here now, Andrew.
Right, and I think that's very interesting because I think John Dorsey has more of a say than many realize, and I think we're starting to see that because here's a guy that had experience working with Nick in Kansas City, and in 2009, he saw a young coach come from an offensive quality control coach, work his way up to an assistant quarterbacks coach, to offensive quality control coach, to ultimately to wide receivers coach in 2012. He saw varying degrees of success with the wide receivers there. I believe Dwayne Bowe was the only wide receiver that caught a touchdown that year. But I mean, you see a guy that has a tireless work ethic, that worked his way up the right way, and really he kind of got to see the process and everything, and there's a reason why he was willing to vouch for him with the Browns job, and obviously here I think he had a large say and it was an advocate for him with the Philadelphia job.
What do you think that means for Howie Roseman? Is this him overstepping where Howie Roseman was, or do you think it's just more of like a collaboration? That's the word they like to throw out at us. I mean, what does this really mean for Howie if we're learning that, hey, maybe John Dorsey's fingerprints is on this?
I think the Eagles would like for you to believe that it's going to be more of a collaborative effort. But what we're seeing here is I think that Jeffrey Lurie is a smart man. I think he realizes the problems that are kind of here, or at least he's aware of some of the issues. And I think that he knows that he needs to make some kind of alterations. And I think, and we've talked about it on this show, I think some of those changes are going to be giving a little bit more responsibility, letting John Dorsey have a little bit more say in some of the football operation aspects of the job. And I think we're starting to see that kind of play out early on.
We're talking with Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4 here. The Eagles have hired Nick Sirianni to be their new head coach. He's been the offensive coordinator at Indianapolis. He has been – how about his versatility, though? You mentioned he's been a quarterback coach. He's been a wide receiver coach. And you wonder if that versatility is something that has the Eagles intrigued as well, a guy who will pop into the wide receiver room, who will talk to the quarterback, and be a part of the offense, because we know how much Jeffrey Lurie values an offensive mind.
Yeah, and I believe it was Adam Kaplan on the latest Inside the Birds podcast that mentioned that there's a lot of energy about him, and he's going to pop his head in there. And you look at, he has such a versatile resume, but you look at what he did with the Chargers. Tyrell Williams had his two best seasons of his career in 2016 and 2017. Keenan Allen had his best season in 2017. Both were under Sirianni's tutelage. And then we look at his resume speaks for itself with the Colts. I mean, that offense has lacked a bona fide playmaker over his tenure. T.Y. Hilton's been in and out of the lineup, and yet their offense hasn't really missed a beat. And I think that I mean he didn't call plays, but he was very involved with the game plan and kind of drawing up a lot of those things. And he has that creative mind about him. And yeah, I mean, he's well-versed in a lot of things. I think that was very appealing when they were kind of narrowing down their final candidates.
When bringing in a new system, there's obviously going to be growing pains. So knowing the frustration with Carson Wentz, what do you think is fair in terms of expectations and success?
Right. Well, I think Nick Sirianni, after he gets settled in, after the presser, and he starts to get his bearings, I think what he needs to do is have a meeting with Carson Wentz, make it very clear what his expectations are, what his objectives are, where he would like to get them. Just kind of iron everything out so there's no gray area. Communication has been a very murky subject with the Eagles over the last year. We saw so many different leaks, so many different stories. We never really knew what to believe, but I think it's very important that he gets everybody on the same page so that there's no buy-in questions and there's no question about what his message is and what his objectives are as a head coach. And I think the first person he needs to sit down with is Carson Wentz.
Hey, Andrew, what about – you're right about that, by the way. Before I get to my question on Deuce, I want to ask you about – do you think that Wentz but said, you know what, called Frank Reich, said, we're interviewing this guy. Like, do you think Carson kind of endorsed this over, say, Josh McDaniels? Maybe the front office wanted Josh McDaniels, but Wentz said, you know what, I feel more comfortable, because we know how important fixing Wentz is to this offseason.
Yeah, well, Wentz is the franchise quarterback. There's a lot obviously invested in him. So, I mean, I'm sure that they ran it by him or they asked for his input. They may have not weighed heavily, but they want to know what their franchise quarterback, what's his thoughts? What is he thinking? Because this whole season really centers around him. If he could get his, resurrected, not only is the season going to go awry, but they have a big problem in what they do with, moving forward with their franchise quarterback. So, yeah, I do think that they asked for his opinion, and I kind of wanted to see where he was at with that, and I'm sure that ultimately played into their decision.
Deuce Staley doesn't get the job. Does he return to the organization? Does he move on? And my question is, he's been here with 3 different staffs. He's been passed over a couple times before. Does Deuce have other opportunities? Does he say, you know what, I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to get the head coaching job here. I'm out. Does he have other opportunities? What, in your mind, is the Deuce story?
If I'm Deuce Staley and I'm getting passed over, and they like to say that they like the whole no play calling thing against him, but Sirianni is a perfect example of a coach that hasn't called plays. So I mean, if I'm Deuce Staley, I'm looking to move on and turn the page and start a career elsewhere. It's interesting because he might be a candidate for Frank Reich's staff as an offensive coordinator there. I mean, Doug Peterson may be as well. That's a guy that we talk about, the Frank Reich connection, and the fact that Deuce hadn't really gotten other opportunities elsewhere. Well, this is a guy that's worked with him directly and can vouch for, his coaching acumen. And it wouldn't surprise me to see him resurface there or elsewhere, because he can coach in this league. He deserves another opportunity. I thought he deserved a more serious opportunity here in Philadelphia, but that's all said and done. I mean, I think he should go elsewhere and kind of hit the reset button on his career, and he'll be just fine. Deuce Staley's a great coach.
The Eric Bieniemy story too. I mean, is this simply that he's kind of screwed because his team's winning, that the Eagles and just didn't want to wait any longer? They wanted to make this decision. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like what's going on with the NFL coaching hires. Yet again, this offseason, Bieniemy gets passed over potentially for a second or even third straight season, depending on how long you think he was a legit candidate. But is that rule not allowing these guys to coach coming back to bite a candidate like Bieniemy, or should he and the Eagles have waited to talk to him?
Well, I think that they couldn't hurt to wait and talk to him, because how many times, Nick Sirianni was a name that emerged late in this process. He would have still been there over the weekend if it can't hurt to talk to a coach. I would have talked to Kafka as well. Talk to both of those guys. Maybe one of those guys blows you away, or maybe they don't, and you go with Sirianni, who you had a good feel about. I mean, it certainly couldn't have hurt, but it's down to one head coaching vacancy, and I think that the Houston Texans are going to possibly be. I would hope that Eric Bieniemy would be at the top of their list, and it wouldn't surprise me to see him land there. But yeah, Mike, I do think that a lot of these coaches are kind of, they're penalized almost for winning, because all the positions start to dry up, and now we're down to one spot here.
The last we heard, Carson Wentz needed time to think about things. Do you think we should rule out the possibility, even if it's very slim, that he's still done with this city?
It would certainly be nice to hear something from him, because we really haven't heard him say anything since the Green Bay game. So it's kind of hard to get inside his head and wonder and know what he's thinking. But this, like I said, this move, the first thing that came to my mind was this move was made with Carson Wentz solely in mind. And I think that he's going to be. This has to be a pleasant hire for him, and I'm sure that it probably resets what his vision and what he thinks. And I think we'll probably be fully committed to the city and willing to engage and pick up on his methods and see where it goes. And I think that it's going to be a fresh start for both of them.
So this would imagine that we all believe that Carson Wentz is not going anywhere, and this hire kind of stamps that.
Yeah, I would be floored if Carson Wentz moves on.
All right. Football at 4, Andrew DiCecco. Now, let me ask you this. You like the hire, Sirianni, or do you feel like there was someone else now that they made the hire? Do you feel like they made I know a couple of years ago, look, Peterson was not the guy everybody wanted, and the people thought he made a mistake. Was there someone else you had your eye on that thought was probably a better decision?
Well, I do like the hire, but like I was saying, I think that they could have stood to wait a few days and really interview Mike Kafka and Eric Bieniemy just to see where they're at. Like I said, maybe they blow you away, or maybe they don't. But there's no, and then you just go right back to Sirianni, who you had a good feeling about. I think that I ultimately do think it's going to be a good fit with the Eagles, but there's nobody that really stood out. Like I said, I really like Robert Saleh, but he was gone very early in the process. So I mean, I think it's going to be a good marriage between the two.
All right, there you go. As the Eagles have made their decision, they have hired Nick Sirianni. He was an offensive coordinator. By the way, a couple guys that he worked with in the past include Mike McCoy, Anthony Lynn, Romeo Cornell, and he worked for Todd Haley as the offensive coordinator. Todd Haley was the head coach, in Kansas City. So Sirianni was in Kansas City.
He's also a good receivers coach. Todd Haley's also a good receivers coach. So that's a name to watch for that as well.
Yeah, and Cornell, I guess, was the head coach, the interim last year. You wonder if Houston's if he's gonna be back in Houston or what's gonna happen there, because Romeo Cornell is a very good defensive mind. He would be he would be that Jim Schwartz feeling kind of guy that, like, hey, you're the head coach of the defense, go take that and run with it.
Yeah, Romeo Cornell's another guy. Terrell Austin, like I said, Marvin Lewis, who has a very long history of working with linebackers and developing linebackers. And of course, he was a defensive coordinator with the Ravens when they were, when they had Ray Lewis in his prime and Peter Boulware and all those guys. So, I mean, there's going to be some options out there. It's interesting to see what direction that he decides to go.
All right, there you go. Andrew DiCecco, DiCecco. NFL, you can follow him, of course, Football at 4 right here on the Sports Bash. Andrew's back on Tuesday to talk more Football at 4. Here tomorrow, Adam Kaplan from the Inside the Birds podcast. We'll get reaction from Adam, what he's hearing on this hire. And, of course, Romeo Cornell, by the way, is the head coach who promoted Sirianni to his first position coach job as the wide receiver coach in Kansas City. So those two have a pretty good relationship. So Sirianni has some interesting ties. We'll be keeping our eye on it. And, of course, Andrew, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk on the hotline. All right, Andrew, take care, man.
Have a good one, guys.
You do the same.